Hello from the high school library. Conservatives, liberals, socialists, nationalists. We're going to be looking at the review sheet for Unit 7, which is Post-Napoleonic Europe. And starting from top to bottom, looking at the term conservatism. This refers to the general belief system of the aristocracy that had lost status, had lost power during the French Revolution. And their goal after Napoleon's defeat is, one, legitimacy, restoring legitimate monarchs to the thrones where they had been bumped off, in particular by Napoleon, and a balance of power to keep something like the French Revolution from happening again, from Napoleon happening again. Conservatives supported tradition, they supported the monarchy, they supported the church, they supported privileges, and many of them are trying to dial back to the old status quo as much as would be possible. The Congress of Vienna is this meeting in 1815 after Napoleon's been defeated a second time and shipped off to St. Helena in the South Atlantic. The goal of the Congress of Vienna is to restore order to Europe, to keep the peace. These are the victors over Napoleon, and they are, you should know, the four countries: Austria, Russia, Prussia, and Great Britain. And the Concert of Europe refers to the continued meetings after the Congress of Vienna for the purpose of keeping order, of keeping this balance of power. The Quadruple Alliance refers specifically to a military commitment between the powerhouse countries of Great Britain and Austria, Prussia, and Russia. And the goal here is keeping peace, keeping order, keeping a balance of power, suppressing liberals and nationalists and socialists who now and then, 1820, 1830, 1848, are disrupting this stability. Clemens von Metternich is the Austrian foreign minister, and he is the architect of this post-Napoleonic order. Sometimes you'll hear the age of Metternich used to describe this period of relative peace and stability following Napoleon's demise. Conservative institutions would be the monarchy, would be the aristocracy. Also, you might see this called the nobility or the landed gentry. These are the elite below the king, and maybe the remnants of that second estate, and the church. The reaction to the French Revolution is basically that this must not happen again. Remember, we went over this in class. If you compare the period here after the French Revolution to what had happened before it, remember the Spanish Succession Wars, you had 400,000 dead in Europe. The Wars of Austrian Succession, you had 600,000 dead. The 7 Years' War, you had 1.3 million dead. The Wars of the French Revolution, you had 250,000 dead. The Napoleonic Wars, you had 4 million dead. When we get to the revolutions of 1848, which are really the biggest period of violence in this period between the end of Napoleon and World War I, there's only about 77,000 who died total. Not a small number, but just a drop in the bucket compared to these major upheavals that preceded the Congress of Vienna. So the Congress of Vienna, the AP wants you to see that it is an attempt to bring order to Europe, and the short answer is it is more effective than it is not, at least in the immediate short run here. Nationalism is the idea, the belief that people who have a common language, who have a common culture, a common ethnicity, should be a nation, should have political unity. And it would include those people who are divided, such as the Italians and Germans, that they want unity, and there are these movements will bear successful fruition in 1870-71 in both Italy and Germany, but also those groups that are under the control of other nations, such as the Hungarians and Czechs who are under the thumb of the Austrian Habsburgs, the Irish who are under British rule, and the Greeks who are under Ottoman rule. These groups want freedom, they want liberty, they want independence, they want to be united as one people. The Burschenschaften, this is that student liberal group in the German states which is being suppressed by the Carlsbad decrees. The conservative government in the Confederation of the Rhine, or the German Confederation, are looking to keep the peace, looking to keep tranquility by suppressing liberal troublemakers and agitators. And we all know that university students tend to be very idealistic, and they are looking for looking for greater liberalism, looking for greater laxness to the conservative order, which young people tend to chafe at. And in France, you should be familiar with the post-Napoleonic rulers and their end. Louis XVIII is a Bourbon who's put on the throne of France, and the victors here at the Congress of Vienna, they don't slice and dice France up, and they are not extorting reparations out of France. They're playing long ball, and they're looking to keep order in France by putting a legitimate Bourbon ruler back on the throne. This is the brother of Louis XVI, who was guillotined. When Louis XVIII dies, Charles X, his brother, takes over, and he is a reactionary. He wants to dial that clock back as if the French Revolution, or the calendar perhaps would be a better description, back to as if the French Revolution had never happened. By a reactionary, this means he's an extreme conservative. In his July ordinances, he is going to dissolve Parliament. And there's a small group of very wealthy who are in a Chamber of Deputies, but he dissolves them. That's just too much to share power with them. He basically wants to go back to absolute monarchy. He's restoring primogeniture. He is passing laws for restitution of lost wealth of the aristocracy. He's making it a crime to speak out against the church. He's declaring the Catholic Church to be the official church of France. And in July, the people have had enough. There's revolt, there's revolution on the streets of Paris, and he flees to England. And his cousin, the Duke of Orleans, is made the new monarch of France. Now, that's Louis Philippe, who is the bourgeois monarch. He styles himself a man of the people. He wears sort of a suit and tie and a top hat, and he fancies himself to be a sort of a liberal monarch. But he expands suffrage, but he goes from about 100,000 to 200,000. So there's a lot of people who are still left out, and there's an agricultural depression and industrial depression in 1847 through 48. There's street protests, and he bans them, so people are meeting and they're having banquets. This is kind of a subterfuge to have an indoor protest, and this will spill back out into the streets, and he will flee, just like Charles X earlier did, and he'll flee to England. At this point, there will be a second republic declared and an election, and Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, the nephew of the Napoleon Bonaparte, will be an elected president here of a second republic. And he will rule in 1848, and 4 years later, he will do sort of an auto coup d'etat. He'll overthrow his own government, and he will put himself in power as a new monarch, Napoleon III. So that's where we leave off with this unit. The revolutions of 1848, where are they? They are in France, they are in the German states, they are in Austria, they are in Italy, they are in Poland. Why are the revolutions? Liberals want greater freedom, greater participation. You have nationalists who want their own country. You have socialists who want some sort of a redistribution of wealth or government jobs for the poor, or the suffering of those at the bottom to be addressed. And the results here is every revolution of 1848 by the end of the year are rolled back, although it looks promising at the time. The student uprising in Austria sends Metternich fleeing. Everybody's fleeing to Britain when they flee. That's the place of exile. You have the Louis Kossuth is leading the Hungarians, and they're declaring independence. And you have the Czechs uprising, and you've got the Poles uprising in Russia, and you've got, of course, the uprising that drives Louis Philippe out, the bourgeois monarch, out of France. So all across Europe, it looks like liberalism is kind of being unleashed. This liberalism, which has been suppressed, looks like there's this uprising of liberals and nationalists. Sometimes there's overlap here, but they are all eventually suppressed. And the Frankfurt Parliament is in 1848, and this is to be noted in particular that delegates from these divided German states are meeting to discuss unifying. And there is this argument, this discussion, should a unified Germany include or not include Austria? And the dominant party in northern Germany are the Prussians. And if Austria joins, that would be called the Grossdeutsch solution. The Gross is German for big, for fat. And it's the big Germany would include Austria. And the Kleinstdeutsch solution is the small Germany, the Germany that would not include Austria. Well, things are made real simple here. Basically, Austria does not want to be part of a Germany where they have to share power and potentially be bossed around by the Prussians. So a united Germany is offered to Frederick William IV of Prussia, and he spurns this offer. He basically spits on it. He will not receive a crown from the gutter. He does not want to be beholden to these people, and German unification will have to wait until after the Franco-Prussian War of 1870 through 1871. But that's coming down the road. So the Frankfurt Parliament is a bust. It is another failure of liberalism in 1848. Conservatism in Russia. Well, remember, the Tsar is an absolutist. There is no parliament. There is no diet. There is no legislature, no chamber of deputies. That's waiting, we're waiting a long time for that until the 20th century. But there is a revolt of returning military officers who've done their time in France, who have suppressed Napoleon and defeated him. And there is this revolt. It's called the Decembrist Revolt, where several thousand soldiers are, protesting and rebelling. They want a constitutional monarchy, like they see elsewhere in Europe, and they are suppressed by a whiff of grape shot by cannon from the Tsar's army, and the leaders are hanged. Utopian socialism. The utopians, not to be confused with the Marxist socialists, utopian socialism is the early socialists. These are thinkers like Saint-Simon and Charles Fourier and Louis Blanc and Robert Owen, who want a society based upon cooperation, not competition. They want technocrats making decisions. They want government planning. They want something to be done about these factory workers, these proletarian laborers who are suffering exploitation and starvation and hunger, and they want something to be done. And Marx is going to distinguish himself. In fact, the epithet, the derogatory term here, utopian socialists, means that these other guys are basically pie in the sky and they're dreamers and idealists and not realistic, where Marx says that his vision, his version of socialism is historical, that it follows this path of history, of class struggle, where different ages bring to bear different groups that are struggling, perhaps serfs and lords. Now this is being replaced by factory owners and factory workers. And he says this last stage here, or this stage next to what will be the last stage, are the bourgeoisie, who have the capital, who have the machines and the factories. The bourgeoisie, the capitalists, are against the proletariat, and this struggle will lead to revolution, which will lead to a socialist state, which will take over these businesses, these factories, and this revolution will eventually usher in communism, where the state will wither away, and we will live communally, sharing the means of production. And capitalism refers to the private ownership of the means of production. Remember, the tools which the little guy used to have in his artisan shop, that the craftsman would have, that the farmer might have for his fields. These tools are becoming the big factory machines, and they're owned by a very small number of wealthy bourgeois capitalists. And the proletariat are those working poor who no longer control the means of production. They don't share in it, and they are become wage laborers. Now, this pretty much refers to factory workers, but when we talk about capitalists or capitalism, it's the private ownership of the means of production. So think of factories, but it would also include banks and railroads, mines and farms, any private ownership of what produces. And Karl Marx is calling for government takeover, and then the government will wither away, and we'll have this sort of utopian nirvana where we all share the means of production to every man according to his ability, and to every man according to his need. Change in the economic nature of the home. What has happened during the Industrial Revolution is the home, which was where there was both production and consumption. You made what you ate or consumed or used. Now the production is leaving the home, and it's going to that private owner of the means of production. So the home becomes solely a place of consumption. Where the revolution should happen first, according to Karl Marx, and he says this is history, this is scientific, it is going to be an industrial country, because this is where history has moved. It's not supposed to happen in an agricultural country, because there's one more step, one more stage, and he is wrong here. He's wrong because the first revolution, as many of you know, in 1917, will be the communist revolution in Russia against the Tsar. So more on why that is later. Romanticism, another one of these isms. This is a reaction against the Enlightenment and a reaction against industry. And It's a celebration of beauty, a celebration of nature, celebration of nostalgia of the individual. And Caspar David Friedrich's The Wanderer Above the Sea Fog, this painting is very emblematic of Romanticism. This guy standing on a mountain crag, this mountain peak, and he's overlooking these clouds, and it's like, ah, wow, nature. And it is a celebration of the beauty of the outdoors. And whenever you see these paintings of waterfalls and rivers and oceans and fields and willow trees, this is a celebration of nature, this sort of little early environmentalism in this age of these cities that are belching smoke and that are full of poverty and open sewers and just a lot of human suffering. Industrialization, why in Britain first? Well, Britain has free trade. Britain has good transportation, has good roads, good canals, and close access to the sea. Britain has stable government. Courts are protecting the sanctity of contracts and private property. You have innovation, you have social mobility, you have vast deposits of coal and iron, and you have this pool of capital, this pool of money from the earlier commercial revolution. Remember, the commercial revolution is that revolution of overseas trade, early empire, which is raising money and wealth. This is all before the Industrial Revolution. So England is really a lot of things going for it, and this industrialization will spread to the continent. The Crystal Palace is the symbol of British industry and technology. It's this place where kind of like an expo show house of British machinery and British technology all under one roof. Thomas Malthus is the economist who says that population will outstrip the food supply. And economics is nicknamed the dismal science because guys like Malthus, guys like David Ricardo in his Iron Law of Wages are basically saying, hey, human suffering is the norm. You can't really do anything about it. If you raise wages, workers will just have more kids, which will lead to more workers and a depression of wages. And so Malthus is sort of a pessimist here about what can be done, in contrast to the utopian socialists and Karl Marx, who have a prescription on how to eradicate, if not mitigate, this human suffering and this ill distribution of wealth. The reforms in Great Britain, you should be familiar with some of them. In Great Britain, you have reform from the top down, which does avoid the rebellion and the revolution that you see on the continent, especially in Austria and in Italy and Germany and France. And you have the Reform Act of 1832, which is going to double the franchise. You have the repeal of the Corn Laws, which lower the tariff on imported bread, which means the price of grain and the price, I said imported bread, imported grain, which is going to reduce the price of grain and lower the price of bread for the masses, for the people in the cities. You have the Mines Act, which is taking women, taking children out of mines and some safety codes and things like that. You have the 10 Hours Act, which is reducing the number of days various groups of people are required to work. So you have the beginning of reform that's coming through an expanded democratic process or representative democracy in Great Britain. And this will continue under Prime Ministers Disraeli and Gladstone, which we'll cover in our next unit. But reform will happen in Great Britain, and it doesn't happen in Russia. So Russia is another place that does not have revolutions, but that's because of the absolute power of the Tsar, who basically is, not putting up with any discussion of liberalism or nationalism in the Russian Empire. So there you have it, guys. This is your review for this unit. So study hard and do well. Signing off from the library.